So welcome everyone to the February 4th edition, if you will, of the Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative Committee Meeting of the Minds. We have some topics that we did not get to touch last time, and very specifically the data collection material and traffic stops. So why don't we kick off with that, unless there's something else that anyone wants to start with or share before we begin. And I remind you that we're going to end tonight as close to 7 o'clock as possible. So we want to be efficient. Anybody have any comment before we start?
Just a process comment. If we
Please.
could restate the exact policy that the data collection is really about, to give the context for the conversation. I mean, I'll say what my recollection is, but I just like to, yeah. So this policy is intended to have police officers put down their understanding of the race, ethnicity of the person they're stopping as a way of creating a feedback loop to check on essentially officer bias, really, and as a tool for the chief to improve the service. So I think that's my understanding. Please, anybody else add to that if that captures it or needs to capture it.
I think that's fair, because I don't think the police officer is going to ask someone what your race is and make them identify how they identify a particular race. So it's going to be my understanding, as you say, Vince, is my understanding. Chief, is that your understanding too?
I wasn't quite sure what we had decided upon, but that's as close to what my recollection is.
Right.
Or if we made a decision on it. But yes, that's what the discussion was.
Right. And it's interesting because Christine, by the way, thank you for putting this together. I thought you did a fabulous job.
Thanks, Joe.
And I thought it was really insightful that you have to be really focused on what it is that you want to be achieving through this, because it is not the end all and be all, and it won't necessarily give you the answers that you want. And I just think we have to be mindful of understanding what this data collection may or may not give us insofar as the answers that we're seeking. And how once we collect this data, how we get to wherever it is that we think we need to be.
I'd add to that I think it's important to see what other communities are doing and understand how they're dealing with this issue.
Do you think it'd be helpful if I just, for people that are watching, just kind of run down what I shared with the
Oh, that was thank you, Christine.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Great.
So as a part of my role, it was to provide the group information on traffic data stop collection and the recommendation, which I really didn't provide, because I feel like this is such a big issue that we probably need to talk about it collectively. But I did have some thoughts based on what I shared. So I looked at 2 major studies, and I shared those studies with our group. And I broke out some of the major themes that were identified, particularly in the aggregate study that was the first one that was shared, that analyzed over 700 law enforcement agencies. And so the first thing that they articulated was the importance that Jill is just talking about, and understanding what kind of data you collect, why you want to collect it, and what you plan to do with it. And there were a bunch of guiding questions that I just pulled out as examples for people to think about what people have thought about who went forward with traffic stop data collection. And then I pulled out some major points that I thought would be important for us to be thinking about in terms of conclusions based on their analysis. And some of those points that I'll just share on them in the meeting is that data collection and evaluation is an appropriate way to address the concerns of racial profiling. The partnership between the operational police expertise and external researchers, which I think is really important, should be established before data collection begins. There has to be clear guidelines. It can be costly, so it needs to be funded. And that there just has to be an acknowledgement from everyone involved that there should be an understanding that examining traffic stops is unlikely to address the finer nuances of defining racial profiling. And so then I just went on to talk about, in the report, and give an example of how race collection could be completed. And there was some language in the research that just talked about how having a shared definition of what race or ethnicity was inconsistent across their analysis of the studies. And so that would be important for us to define or the police to define as a part of their process. And then I just showed an example of race categories in one example of a police force, and I quoted where people could go and look for that in the study. And then I shared 3 major methodologies that were used to collect this data. The first was their in-car computer system called the MDC. The second was like a smartphone or a tablet, and the third was paper form. And so then I just shared what the strengths were and what the concerns were using each of those methods, right? Because there's a balance with everything. And then there were some themes about the decision-making process and how important it is to have members of the police team who are going to be engaged in this work, doing the traffic stops as a part of the decision-making process. So there's ownership, because they're the group of people that need to carry out the work, right? So it was problematic when there was an external group making a decision and not having people at the table who actually had to engage in the practice in collecting the data in a way that would probably be most beneficial for the community to glean some understanding of what was happening. And then one of the things that I thought was important, just based on some of what we had talked about, is that there was an agency where they collected data like this, and then people got a receipt, so they knew what data was collected. And so I thought that, not that that could be a way of checking to see if the police officer was right, but it definitely is a step in the process that I hadn't thought about when we were talking about this collectively. So maybe one of the things that we need to think about based on the data is not necessarily recommending that we should do traffic stop data collection, but maybe it should be that the committee could consider recommending that Chiefs Advisory Committee look at this as a potential data collection process moving forward. That way his committee could involve people that would actually be engaged in this work, and they could collectively decide together how to move forward, rather than us say, well, we think you should do this, because based on this research, it didn't seem to me thematically that a group like this would be the one that should say this is what you should do, because we're not necessarily the right people around the table to make that decision if we really want this to work. So that's just my initial thoughts.
Can I say something? I'm not. I think, you know, that's a lot of analysis. It's a lot of documentation to look at, but I think we're making this a lot more, maybe I'm being Pollyannish, but I think we're making this a whole lot more complicated than it needs to be. The whole purpose of this, we have real life experiences. Some people as part of this committee have real life experiences, and all we need to do is put some demographic information on the tickets, on the officers' logs. We really are focusing on their perception. I don't think that this should go to another, you know, like the Chiefs Advisory Board or whatever. That's not going to help us, because we need the information prior to that. It would be helpful to the chief to see if there was a trend happening. And the fact is, we've already spoken to a number of people who have personally experienced this. And quite honestly, when I was on the CRE last summer, we came up with recommendations based on the work that we had done for the whole summer. And our recommendations included modifying Newcastle Police Department officer logs, call logs, and incident reports to include race, ethnic, demographic information. And then in addition to that, modify traffic ticket forms to reflect the same information at the state level, and move that on to Governor Cuomo's plate. I think we're getting into the weeds too much here. We need some basic information tracked, And I don't think that should be a difficult thing to do.
And then I'd like
Now,
some clarification from you. You're saying that you know people who've had it done. Are you talking recently or in the past? Because some people might be jumping in this meeting and just based upon what
No,
you're saying that to me, it could sound like Newcastle police officers are doing this. And then
Right, I'm
people being stopped.
yeah, no, I
Yes.
understand. It has happened in Newcastle. It didn't happen to me. Okay. We have heard from people it has happened to. I can't give you the precise dates. I know it has happened as long ago as 7 years, and I have heard stories of it happening as recently as within the last year. Does it happen on a regular basis? It's happened enough that there are enough people who won't even get onto the Sawmill Parkway at certain entrances because they want to bypass this possibility. That says something. And it doesn't necessarily mean we have, people, we seem to have a very good police department, I would venture to say, but there are subtle things that occur. And this is what we need to focus on. And I think this will help us determine that. And I would love for somebody who has had these experiences to speak up again, because I think those memories are not very clear for everybody on this board or on this committee. I think it's very simple.
So I know a firsthand experience of a 16-year-old Black boy who was stopped maybe a month ago, and he had just gotten his license, which makes him even more scared to be driving. And while he was stopped, I think along the way, he was stopped somewhere next to Chappaqua and Mount Kisco. And then somewhere along the same time he was stopped, I think there were about 2 to 3 other young Black boys who were stopped. And then before the cops could say or do anything, they just got another call. So they left him, and nothing was pursued of that stop. So this is, first-hand experience, which I heard of. Like I said,
It's something you heard of, though, not firsthand experience, correct?
sorry, not firsthand, but the child's mother spoke to me about it.
And do we know the reason for the stop?
No.
It actually happened to me, so here's a firsthand experience. My senior year of high school, I was leaving the Greeley parking lot and got pulled over by a cop for no reason and was accused of drunk driving when I was literally going to get ice cream. The cop then proceeded to smell my hand sanitizer in my car after I told the cop that it was the smell of hand sanitizer in the car.
I guess, does anyone really, is there a dispute over whether the idea that police officers might profile somebody by their race is an issue? Aren't we past that? I think we know it has happened.
Yeah, I think where the research was very clear that data collection is important, but it's also very clear that there should be a process that involves people who would be involved in collecting that data in order for it to be effective. And that's what my concern would be if we don't add a layer to this when making that decision. While it might seem simple, it didn't read as simple when I looked at those research studies. It actually looked very complicated. And there were some good recommendations that I think are really important if you want it to be done in a way where you get information that you can use. Plus, there was a lot of language in there about having to partner with someone outside of the agency to do this work.
I just want to point out that 19 other states have programs like this, so it really can't be as complex as we're making it out to seem.
Oh,
With respect,
I'm
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Shelley,
No,
go ahead.
No,
I was just, go ahead, Jill. Sorry. Okay, so in the research, there's tons of programs like this out there, tons of programs. They've analyzed a ton of programs. And so I think it's not about it's not about complications, it's about effectiveness. And so if we're gonna move forward, and this is gonna be a recommendation that we think that this is important, then there's a process that is demonstrated in the research that's effective, that would occur outside of this meeting. And so that's sort of what my thought would be. Like you can simplify it, but if you simplify it, it may not be as effective as you wish it to be, which is why you look at research and you make this, you use that in a way to make a decision that makes sense where you can accomplish the same goals. So that's just my point. I believe we should do this based on what I read. I just think we should think about the process and how to do it.
Yeah, so that was the thing I want to clarify. So this isn't a question of whether we should do it. It's a question of how. That's the point.
Right.
Well,
And
that's fair. I think that's fair, Vince. I think that's accurate. That's my understanding too.
Yeah. And I just, unfortunately, we don't have the time that is needed to give this its proper due at this time. And that's why, I mean, I took a look at some of the surveys and some of the studies, and you did a fabulous job distilling these down to the key points because they're substantial. So thank you for the crib notes. But when you go back and you actually look at the studies, they are very comprehensive. And I think that Dahara actually raised a really great point about the fact that there are states that have done this. And I do think it should be part of a larger state study that is being done. I'm happy for Newcastle to be a leader in this, but standing alone is, in this sort of instance is actually pretty problematic. It should be part of a larger effort, and we should be including it in our recommendations to Governor Cuomo that it should be a statewide system that analyzes it.
But what I don't understand, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Why can't both be true? Like, why can't the recommendations of the state be that this should be more systematic? And we have a functional, practical way of doing this locally that gives us information that's useful for us, for the chief and the board to look at. Why is that not possible?
It's not a problem at all. And it's fine, but it has to be part of a larger study. And I'm happy to have us do it ourselves, but we don't have the time or the expertise or the partners identified at this point to be able to move forward with this group.
Well, see, that's the thing that I'm trying to point at. It's just like, it sounds like you think this is research. I don't see this as research.
Right.
This is feedback. It's a feedback loop. That's what it is. That's what we're asking for.
Yeah, but you have to collect the data, and you need someone to be
how you do it
Yeah.
is relevant. I get it. But if we look at it as feedback and not research, it's different.
And what is so difficult about just checking off some boxes on tickets and notes that are being made anyway? Why is that so difficult?
What are you doing with that information? That's the
Well,
point.
okay, you have that information.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I understand. And I think Christine's point of having somebody come, having an outside group help analyze that's certainly not out of the question. I don't know. I mean, but we should really see what we're experiencing here. We need that information because we know it happens.
I don't think anyone's disagreeing with what anyone's saying. I think what I say is the feedback that you receive will be impacted by the process that you move forward to collect the data, and that there are people who need to be a part of the process and how data is going to be collected and why, and answer those guiding questions who aren't in this room because they are the data collectors. So if we just move forward and said, we're going to do this, you're going to collect data, and you don't have the right people sitting in the room making those decisions with you, then all the themes that were problematic that impacted the feedback will start to emerge. So you have to take that into consideration. That's why that's why I keep referring to, we may as a collective group say, yes, this is important, but the process and how and the why and the questions aren't answered here. They're answered in Jim's subgroup, where he has more members of his team with him, because that is identified as extremely important in moving forward with this process, based on what I read.
Yeah, for me, that was really the compelling piece of the presentation that you did tonight, Christine. I mean, it really rang true for me that we would need to have members of the department, the people who are actually making the stops and collecting the data, be a part of this process of coming up with what the program looks like. So I actually really liked your recommendation with regard to you know, this group can and should make this a recommendation. We've studied this. We believe there's value in this. But I do believe that the implementation of the program and it is not necessarily as simple as adding a box to the ticket and requires some additional thought. I think we're actually probably all in agreement on that it requires some additional work by the folks who would be involved in doing the work. I think we all, am I wrong about that?
No, you're not. I mean, honestly, that's true about every recommendation we make.
Right.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about the mental health, like having volunteers, there's a lot to work out about that. There's a lot to work out about that too. So so what we're saying then, to pick up this, is we're saying that this is an important thing we want to see happen. That's the decision of this body, really, correct? And that the considerations that Christine is raising are part of the how. And yeah, this body isn't going to do the how. I don't think this body was doing any of the how.
But we're putting out the basic information that we really believe we need to, you know, determine future actions and trends and future needs.
Right, but we're not the ones who are deciding how different things are going to be done. We're making the recommendations.
And I would go a
Correct.
step further, Martha, to say Jim's subgroup will be defining will be answering questions to guide the process, because that's outside the bounds of this group as well.
Right.
Right. So they'll be working together to figure out what do they want to know, how do they want to collect the data, what makes sense based on their operations, and that would be in Jim's smaller advisory group that has representation, as well as with his team that have to actually implement the program. Because we don't, you know, there's so much in there that has to be discussed that is so beyond this group. But I think making it a recommendation that discussion be had and that progress be made, I think is within the scope of this group. But that's just my opinion.
But we are saying, like if we're saying demographic data needs to be collected on routine stops that don't lead to tickets. You know, the subgroup, if that's the agreement, the subgroup can't say, well, we're not doing that.
Right.
The subgroup is there to say, well, how are we going to do that then?
Right.
Right.
And actually implement it, right? They
it
will
would
be the
seem-
ones to decide the
Right.
process, because the
but it-
process is important.
Sorry.
Well, I also want to suggest that hopefully we're not the only municipality that's considering this, right? I mean, you know, to the extent that there are other municipalities that are going through this process right now and coming up with this as a recommendation, it would be hugely beneficial for us to be able to piggyback on some of that work as well. So, you know, maybe when the subgroup gets started, if they can kind of do a little bit of outreach and figuring out where other municipalities are at with this.
Or the county, or
I was just gonna say, it
the
also
state,
seems
yeah.
like that should be one of the recommendations we make to the state, that it be a statewide thing, which I think somebody already said that, you know, so it goes above us. And we're gonna do our best to add things and to have the Jim subcommittee do this, or the chief subcommittee do this, but we also make a recommendation to the state that the state needs to also do the same kind of record keeping, or however you want to say it, looking, you know, same kind of questionnaires or information be collected.
Well, yeah, it would be a two-prong, I'm sorry.
No, you go first.
Thanks. It would be a two-prong recommendation. It would deal with local tracking as well as the larger statewide tracking, because Newcastle experiences an awful lot of state-based traffic stops and traffic tickets. I mean, our court is inundated with it, and it's very, very important. So I guess, and I just want to be clear. So we're comfortable making a recommendation, a dual prong recommendation, that certain demographic information has to be, you know, needs to be included in traffic tickets, traffic stops, logs and incident reports. And then the advisory group or whatever other group becomes involved, professional or otherwise, would then help determine how we do that. I just want to make sure that we get the recommendation that we need to have this demographic information collected at those points of contact.
The state is requiring, we have talked about this, tracking on traffic tickets.
Right.
Uh,
So that's already done.
So
And,
what
yeah,
we're really talking about is traffic stops.
yes.
And
That don't result
that
in
would be our
tickets.
recommendation going forward.
Yes.
The county police does track demographics on traffic stops. I was talking to the commissioner there. They've been
Oh,
doing
is that right?
They've
Yes.
been doing it for 20 years. And it's actually a county law that it requires them to do it. So
Right.
So
And they
it's
actually
even easier
patrol, they patrol the sawmill, don't they?
provide summonses to our, that's correct.
Well,
So
is it
it's
traffic
interest-
stops or tickets only?
So everybody has to do tickets. Now the courts are doing tickets. The county police themselves track stops. In addition, they track stops. The
Okay.
ticket will automatically be counted by the court. The new computerized tickets do include a box for race, but the county on every stop is demographics as well, including race.
And who has access to that information? Who could have access to that information?
I'm sure it's foilable by anybody.
Okay.
So you were not aware of that, Kimberly?
No, I was not. And it's something that we had discussed in CRE. And I think actually, Chief, I think we had talked about it. I don't think we were aware that the state, we had talked about beginning to track demographics. And I don't think we were aware that the state was doing it at that time.
That has
Because
come,
you're the one who told me, yeah, you're the one who
With
told
the
me about
tickets.
the
that has
tickets,
come,
exactly.
that has come out since police reform.
Our discussions.
Mm.
Yeah,
Right.
okay. Okay. So we should still include it in the recommendation because it just reinforces what they're doing. But I think at a local level, it shows that we should be doing it as well. Because that's a hole that, that needs to be filled. Does anybody disagree with that?
No, I just, I would rather just have it phrased that demographic information be collected at the time of the stop and leave it to the CAB to determine how that happens, whether it be through
That's
the
fine.
memo book, whether
Yeah,
it be
I think
what-
that's
whatever
yeah,
the methods
appropriate.
are.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we're talking about officer logs, incident reports, and I do have a question. We were talking about call-in logs, and it's a little bit different, a little bit off track. But well, no, you know what? Let me scratch that. We can talk about that another time. Never mind.
And Kim, I just want to be clear. I don't know. I don't think we're talking about giving a recommendation to the nuances of how data is to be collected.
Right.
That would be the next phase where you have
Right.
people
Right.
actually collecting the data, talking about what makes sense and what works for them
Right.
based on
Right.
what the need is. Okay.
Right. Dara, I'm sorry, I cut you off earlier and you let me
totally
go.
fine. I was gonna ask if the information would be foilable also, but my other question is actually, when we talk about demographics that are being collected, are we only talking about race? Are we talking about race, ethnicity, age, and gender?
Well, it's interesting that you said that because in the study, there are police traffic stop collectors that expand way beyond race. So I think it all depends on the questions that the sub-team and the questions they want answered.
Okay, yeah, because I know the state of Virginia does all of the above.
Yeah, there were some great examples of that in the survey that we sent out.
Yes.
Christine, you said this a couple of times, and I want to just draw this distinction. The questions they want answered. It's not, we're asking the question. They're figuring out how to get the information. It's a subtle difference, but it's important that the policy is being set for them to carry out, not to decide what questions to ask.
No, actually, what we're asking is for demographic data to be collected, right? The subgroup would be talking about why are we collecting it? How are we collecting it? How are we using it? Like that's outside. If you look at the data, there was a group of questions in the beginning. We're not answering those questions. We're not developing them. That would be the subgroup. That's why I keep referring to the questions, because they're driving the process outside of this meeting, not necessarily us. right?
Well, I
Yeah.
think the why we know why. I mean, we're not asking them, why are we collecting this? We
Yeah, I
know
think
why
you
we're
are.
collecting it.
I
We
think
want-
that's
we-
part of the,
So if the questions are how to collect it,
Right.
that's, I get it, but I just, the language is really important when it comes to this. And I
Right.
just like,
right.
if all the
If your
questions are,
question is,
how is the
why
data to
is
be
the-
collected and how is it to be stored and who gets to look at it and all
Well,
that, I get.
It's beyond that. It's what types of data are you collecting? Like people define race differently in this study. So that is a part of the work outside of this
Actually,
group.
Actually, that's not outside of this group. We've already
Correct.
defined that.
No,
That
no,
we've defined.
no, you have to look at the nuances between census data and then communities.
No, that's
right?
not the point. No, that's not the point. The point here is the perception of the person making the stop. We don't have to be concerned with census data. It's the perception of the person making the stop. We're trying to determine if there's a trend or if there is a bias. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, but
And I think we're getting caught up.
this the categories within the race category to determine who the perceptions are really important. That's very important.
Yeah.
That's a part of the process of the subgroup, because what I shared with you is that there wasn't a clear distinction amongst the study that was clearly defined globally, right? So all of this work is really, we're not disagreeing here on anything. What I'm sharing with
Sounds
you,
like
I guess, is illustrating how complicated this really is. I know it
Yeah.
seems simple, but it is very complicated.
How to do it is complicated. What we're doing, I don't think is complicated. I think it's pretty basic. Does anybody agree with me that it's kind of basic?
I mean, it seems that way to me. Certainly. It seems fairly straightforward. If you're talking about,
I don't think
you
what
know,
we're doing is basic. I do think the why is why are we doing? And listen, I think it's a good thing. I think we do. But what is the group saying? Why are we doing this? Because there's a perception that it's happening. There's a perception that it isn't happening. We're
No.
trying to prove
There's a perception that it is. I'm sorry, but there's a perception that it does happen.
it's not a
To what
perception, there's
extent
an
we don't
experience.
know. There's an experience that it does
It's an
happen.
experience.
it does
Yeah,
happen.
that's true.
because
It happens.
But in all
Well, let's see if
community,
it does happen from the data. That's what I'd be interested in knowing.
Right,
right. That's what I'm going
That's the point.
exactly.
And how do you define it happens? That's another question too. I'm not exactly sure. Is 1 out of 10, 3 out of 7, 5 out of 20? I mean, how do you figure out what point can you extrapolate that it's happening? or
Here's
not?
a question too. Does nighttime stops count?
Of course.
Well,
How do I know?
well, if the officers can't see the people that they're stopping, then the race really doesn't matter.
Correct.
Then they don't have any perception. when
And
they're stopping.
So
So
these are
you'll
the
have that
questions.
information.
Like, these are the questions that I keep coming back to that are outside, that the small group need to work on. I think we all agree, traffic stop data collection is important
Right.
about race.
Agreed.
But there's a whole bunch that needs to happen before you get to the part where you start collecting data. That's really
I
what I'm
agree.
saying.
I agree with you, Christine, on that. I think that this is sensitive. This is loaded. And it's important that the overall spirit of what we're trying to do is clear and preserved. Because I think that Jim said something had occurred to me is like, there are traffic stops in town. There are residents. There are people who work here. There are people who drive through, So there's all different kinds of groups. So the question going to, let's say 25% of the people who stop are people of color. That is certainly not the demographic of the town. Is that a proportional amount of the people who drive through town? So there's a lot of questions about like, is it fitting? But having the information allows you to have that discussion. And that is the question.
And going back to the nighttime stops, I think gauging nighttime stops would be a good blind control to compare it to the daytime stops.
Sure.
And in addition to what you were touching on, Vince, I definitely feel I agree with you in your point. So I think it would be something that would possibly be needed.
And going to Christine's point, like having all of these variables trying to, I mean, there's, you know, feedback that Chief Carroll could use and sort of notice one cop,
Right.
and he's always putting down, that's one kind of level. But then a broader discussion is going to need some sort of a professional to look at all the variables and try and make sense of it. So there are many,
Right.
once you have the data, you can do all kinds of things with it.
Right.
Chief, do the officers ever call in the plate number and get the name of the person before they actually stop the car?
There could be times on a rolling stop that a rolling check that they would do that. They would get a description of the plate, not the name, more or less to see if the vehicle matches the description. There must have been something else that precipitated it. They have a gray Ford in front of us and the plate comes back as a red Subaru, but they're not getting the name, more of a description of the vehicle.
But they're not getting where the person might live?
No. And then as soon as they pull somebody over, they pull them over with their location, the plate number, and a description of the car. It's not run at that time. And then they approach the vehicle.
So I live in Yonkers. I drive through. I get stopped. What data currently would they get? Would you then know that you made a stop, that someone made a stop from someone in Yonkers? Or would it so it doesn't have that kind of detailed information? I don't get a ticket. They're checking out because, you know, for whatever reason. What data, what information currently is taken when there's not an actual ticket?
Currently, the description of the vehicle and the plate number and the location of the stop, that is what currently is taken. The officer, upon the stop, when they approached you, would get your driver's license and your registration. And at that point could run your license or your registration for further information.
Is the officer information also included? Like the badge number and all that stuff?
It would be included on a summons. You know, if you got issued the summons, but it is also on the officer's garment. And they are required to give it if you ask.
Chief, is there a log? So you're pulling someone over and no ticket is written, no summons is written. Do you log why then? So somebody was pulled over. It would be useful to know why, what was the suspicion to pull somebody over to begin with? Do you log that currently?
It isn't. It would be usually it's summons issued or warning issued.
I think that's almost necessary to include with the demographic information, because the reason for the stop may or may not be based on the demographics of the person in the car. So I would just suggest that maybe we need to include.
And it may not even be a vehicle and traffic violation. It may match a suspicious vehicle or Amber Alert. It could be many other things.
Yeah.
Is the recommendation then that the committee's recommending that Newcastle PD collect traffic stop data based on race?
I think age, gender, and ethnicity should be included too.
Demographic, the basic demographic items.
Okay, but this is going to be, I'm sorry.
So I just want to share that the way that most the way in the research that most places did this was by perception. So there are certain like age and it's going to be might be challenging.
Well, actually, no, if they stop and they look at a license, you're going to get an age and name and all of that. But the perception is when it comes to race or, you know, something's ethnicity. That's where the perception, the subjective perception comes in. The other information is pretty black and white. So it's right there in front of you.
It is and it isn't. You know, that means you require a driver's license on every stop. You know, it could be a quick, you know, hey, a warning. It doesn't require it. So I would want it maybe, you know, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, you know, something like that. Just generic, in case we didn't actually have to get a driver's license on everyone. Maybe that's something we could talk about later. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, it's so the implementation.
Right. Well, and because the devil's always in the details. So race, gender, age, ethnicity, the details of which, the method of which is going to be determined by the CAB, the Chiefs Committee.
One more thing to think about. I know California includes whether or not they're English speakers also when you pull them over as like another part of a demographic. So if that's something that we want to consider, I don't know. I'm just throwing
Well,
it
how
out
do you
there.
do that? Because how are you gonna have perception in advance if someone's an English speaker or not?
Speaker.
Well, when you have a conversation with them, like
I actually had many people pretend they couldn't speak English to me. So it is a difficult one as well.
What a surprise. Yeah.
No, what I guess to my point.
So
Robert,
what do you think
point-
about that one? Do you want to leave that for the CAB? Is that something you want to include?
Can they
I think we
Would that
should
be-
leave that, I think we should leave that to the CAB. I mean, I think if you know, because there's going to be a certain amount of expertise at that table. And I think if we allow them to kind of do that work, it's no secret where we're going with all of this. And so, you know, I'd like to allow them to kind of make those decisions. We want data collected. And, you know, and there's certain information we want to make sure we get. And beyond that, I think we really need to kind of let them come up with the questions or the, you know, what the categories are going to be. But then I tend to be a trusting person. So you know, maybe so.
My question though, if one of the reasons or the reasons why we want, you know, ethnicity or race and to a lesser extent gender is we want to see if someone's being biased when they're making a stop. And their preconceived notion of what someone is based on how they look, whether they ultimately speak English or not.
Right.
How is that? I'm that person driving by and I'm thinking he's not an English speaker.
Right.
You know, you could be
Right.
very light colored, you could be dark colored, somewhere in the middle. You know, it doesn't make a difference of the color of your skin. You could not be an English, so it's not as fruitful in terms of ascertaining bias. I don't think.
I
You
do
a
have
point there.
thing
Oh,
to
Christina.
I am a little concerned with us pushing everything back on the CAB. I disagree with the statement that we are not the right group to be making the recommendations for what's on the demographic form. I unfortunately am not as trusting as Martha, and I would like to see that this group has some more inputs in that than just the CAB.
So just to clarify, Hermione, the recommendation was going to be that we gather demographic information to determine the perception of the officer making the stop, and that it would include race, gender, age, ethnicity, and we're teetering a little bit on the English speaking. We're not sure. We're going to punt that one over to the CAB. And the CAB is going to determine the method of collection as part and parcel of working out the details of what the collection looks like, how the questions are asked with the actual officers who are going to be performing the stops, in collaboration with the people who will then be collecting the information and whatever else the process is. Christine, did I get that about right?
Yeah, yes, you did. You know, I think the thing too that's really nuanced is you have to define the race category. That's on page 26 of the CNA study.
Yeah. Which is, it's.
You really think so?
Can I agree with Hermie then that, you know, the CAB may be the right people to determine some of the details around the process, right? Because I don't stop people on traffic stops. I'm not the expert there. And neither is Hermione, right? But Hermione and the CRE and the members of the CRE that are part of this group might be a better group to inform what are those race categories and to then take the next step on that piece of research.
And there,
I also want to talk about like why we should put age in, because we know that, you know, there could be like historical data which is collected maybe years down when they see like, you know, young Black boys getting pulled over. So, how many traffic stops did he ever get pulled over? So if he's like from the age of 16 when they are minors, I don't know. I think age would be an important factor to put in.
It's included.
Okay.
Race, age, gender, ethnicity, and we were teetering on the English speaking, but.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I think we have to remove the English speaking, to Jeremy's point as well.
Okay, all right.
So does that, Hermie, does that address what you were saying?
It does, and I think Ivy clarified it beautifully.
So I just want to be clear. It goes to the CAB and another subset of people that includes CRE. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I was clear on understanding who would look at those items or help make that determination, Ivy. I'm sorry.
I think that's what I'm saying is that a subset of this group should be involved. As Ivy said, the CAB might be the best at processes,
right?
How it's done, but the input from a subset of this group would be invaluable in terms of what is collected, whereas the CAB will be about the how.
And how would that look in the form of a recommendation? That's my question.
Well, I think it comes down to stating that it will be done in the CAB with the input from the CRE, from the CRE subgroup.
Chief, can you just remind me, because I'm sorry that I know we talked about this and I can't remember. Who are you thinking of as members of the CAB? Not necessarily people, but groups.
Yeah. Let me pull it up real quick. I'm going to share this now. So in case people, I'm not quite myself. I am recovering from COVID.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm doing well. Never concerned other than, cough and fever and loss of taste and stuff. But 6 days in quarantine, but so give me a sec.
Okay.
So he's going a little stir crazy, I think is what he's trying to tell us. So if he goes off the cliff, we know why.
Just take
He's
care
in
of yourself.
quarantine.
All right. So I said persons who live or work in the town of Newcastle, members of the business community of the town of Newcastle, representatives from the Chapakua Central School District, students, staff, or both, representatives from local community organizations, representatives of interfaith-based organizations, and representative of the Newcastle Council on Race and Equity.
The only thing is, in the recommendation, the board will be at least 4 people, but not more than 7. And the people who were listed, that is a total of 6 categories of people. So you're going to want at least more than one person from CRE to help, with this aspect of it. So that brings in a 7th person. I mean, are we just
from CRE?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's my question.
I'm asking more than one. Yeah.
Well, or you could have one, and then that person then turns around and takes this as a to-do, and then involves,
the committee, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The problem is if they're going to get something done, they need.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that would, whoever's going to represent the religious community would have to do the same thing.
That's
exactly
true.
right.
Would have to
true.
go back to the members of the Interfaith Council. So
Understood.
Okay. Yes. More than 7 is just not manageable.
Yeah,
So I
9
mean, the
minutes
CRE
left.
is so the CRE is already a part of the CAB.
Yes. Always was intended to be.
So that additional language in the recommendation, meaning consulting the CRE, on this, does that become moot, or No, I guess not. I guess it is important to at least
Well-
affirmatively indicate that, you know, the CRE will be consulted at some, you know, on these specific
Well, they-
issues.
Well, they're part of the committee, so
So what do you mean,
No,
then,
I-
Jill? Do you don't think it's relevant, or do you think it's relevant?
I just don't, you know,
To me, that means that it's an automatic.
Right.
right.
If
just
they're
don't-
part of the CAB, then they're going to have the input from that group in the same way. Otherwise, I think I think it's kind of going down a slippery slope if we say, well, the CRE must be included because they already are.
But it's not
Okay.
quite the same thing, because the CAB is charged with how, and the CRE corollary, I guess, ancillary part is about what?
Right.
Well, I can't imagine the how is not going to include some of the what. I mean, that's, you know, that will naturally come up. I don't think it's, you know, it's a moving, you know, it's a moving target in a
Target.
way, right? So it's going to be a broad brush. It's not going to just be, you know, we're going to ask the question this way. It's what questions we want to make sure cover the things we're asking for, right? So that's going to automatically involve other people beyond just the people who are sitting on the committee.
Right.
That's how I would interpret it anyway. I think that it's just added language that really is.
I think too, when you get into how you're going to do it, there's going to be resources you're going to use, and that's when you're going to need feedback on collecting the data based on the categories often that are already predetermined. So I do think that there's going to be opportunity to bring what those categories are back to specific groups for feedback before they're finalized within whatever, I'm going to say probably software program the town chooses to support this process. Unless they do some kind of hand document, but there was a lot of concern about error with that.
No, there's going to be, I was thinking about it. And we're going to have add some type of computer system to fine tune the collection. Computer aided dispatch, you know, something along those lines.
So let me formulate this. Do we have a decision about this? Because we have like 5 minutes.
I think, I mean, Jill.
I think we do.
What is it then? What's the decision?
That the town of Newcastle is going to seek to obtain, to obtain demographic information at the time of the stop, including but not limited to race, age, gender, and ethnicity, in order to determine the perception of the stopping officer or the officer engaged in the stop.
Yeah, I mean, I should have been a little sharper. I think the question of the role of the CAB and the CRE, I don't know. I don't know if do we need to make a decision now, but if we are going to make a decision, or if there is a decision, I'm not so clear on it.
I think the decision was made when the CAB is who's going to be on the CAB.
Okay.
So I think the CRE is already involved on the Chiefs Advisory Board. So I don't know that we need anything separate included in this particular recommendation about that.
Right, so the CAB is going to be charged with the implementation
Yeah.
of the process to gather the relevant information and analyze the data.
Is anyone going to be surprised when it's, you know, a lot of teens and 20 somethings getting pulled over as opposed to 50s and 60-year-olds getting pulled over? I mean,
I wouldn't be surprised by that. I would want to know what their race and ethnicity is, though. I would want to.
Right. Right.
All right. All right, I will flesh out this language a little bit. It is my intention that we were going to take and put together all of your revised proposals into a single document. We'll do a cover sheet with each one so that way, people can see what it is. Our recommendations to, so that's regarding the town of Newcastle, our specific recommendations. Our recommendations to the county chief, we had a couple to the county and the state. I still think the group doesn't want to give up on funding for cameras, body cams, which I think, would be a tremendously helpful tool in a lot of these situations as well.
I believe Tiffany did share the recommendation we have for the county and the state with the our today's agenda.
1 second, let me just grab
Yeah,
it.
I mean, all of the
Yeah, it was
statements are
included.
included.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me know.
Any further comment or question on that? Otherwise, we will take and put this all together. And it's our intention to have our first public engagement session next Thursday. The second one will be 2 weeks after that. And I know it's a little bit of short notice on the first public engagement, but we wanted to make sure that we were able to accomplish what we needed to accomplish before we took and set this out.
So that's the 11th?
Yes.
Okay.
And we're going to be there and people are going to talk and we're going to listen. That's the idea.
Yes, so this is, so it's going to be the same sort of setup. It's sort of like maybe the first meeting that we had when we invited the public in. So we'll then be able to announce it in the e-newsletter. Tiffany, Carrie already has a link for us, right? We just didn't tell her to go forward with it until we made a decision after tonight, right?
Yeah, my understanding is we present our plan with an opportunity from feedback from the community. Based upon the feedback of the community, we discuss if we need to make any
Tweak,
change.
right?
Tweak it and then present a final plan 2 weeks from after that.
Jill, just for structure, next week, are we just sitting and listening?
I believe so.
Okay, and we're not engaging. I just don't know, right, with the.
Jeremy,
And that's
thoughts?
what public hearings.
That didn't
we
work
some
for-
of the form-based
last
code.
time.
There's times we just listen.
Okay, just wanted to know what the role was of the group.
I mean, we may
It-
get some questions. People just want to, clarify, like, what's the point? Why are you doing this? What is it that you're seeking to, attain,
So
achieve?
would that
And-
be, let's say somebody does ask a question pointedly, and I'll just talk about with the mental health and they say, could you clarify that? And I just wait for a signal from the chief and say, Vince, could you expound on that? Could that happen? Should I just be prepared for that? Or
It would be from Jeremy, but
Yeah,
Over
I think
Jeremy.
you can, but we just have to be extremely efficient. I mean, I don't know if we'll have 10 people or 50 people show up or
right?
4 people show up. So it just really depends. Just be cognizant of who's here and how many people.
But I'm just saying, could that happen? And should I be prepared if you asked me?
I guess we'll play it by ear. There's been times in our public hearings and other matters that we've actually responded, but generally we don't. But if there's something that needs clarity, we'll respond.
Okay.
So the
And
20th,
That's gonna
we're
be-
not trying to hide anything from anyone. We want
Right.
them to have an opportunity to be heard and ask their.
so the 25th is the second one?
Right.
Okay, fine.
And,
No,
yeah, and it's
Jill,
subject to
Happy
change. I
birthday
mean,
to me.
Jill, it's the 11th and
Birthday?
18th.
11th and 18th, I'm sorry. I thought it was 2 weeks. It's
No.
not 2 weeks?
No.
Whoops, sorry, my bad. 11th and 18th.
So-
Kimberly, you will have a happy birthday. You will not be spending it
Yay.
with us.
Thank you. Not that I don't like being with all of you.
Yeah, now we're not so sure. We believed you
So-
before, but now we're not sure.
So 2 weeks
So,
in a row. Okay,
so the 11th would be from 6, is it scheduled from 6 to 8?
that was the initial plan. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I just want to be sure. That's all. And it's obviously the same thing for the following week.
Well,
Okay.
We should, I'm just running this through my head right now.
Ed.
After the public hearing on the 11th, we probably should allot some time for us to discuss anything that came up at that point. Otherwise, we won't be able to move forward on the 18th. So,
Right.
I think
That's why I thought it was like
yeah. I
that
don't
there
know.
were the 2 weeks in between to give us time, just in case there were questions raised
Right.
or edits recommended, that we had an opportunity to go back.
So maybe we need,
What are your thoughts?
maybe we need to tweak the schedule to go, 11th public hearing, 18th an hour to discuss anything if possible, and then.
Oh, we could do that. Yeah,
Sorry,
well-
Kimberly.
Hey, that's life.
That's a suggestion.
So
So
the
just-
18th would basically a group regroup, a committee regroup,
Because we're not gonna know
Right.
if we need it or not until.
right?
Yeah, the 11th. Sorry
And
about
that would just be an hour?
I think that's all we need.
Okay.
I need to excuse myself, everyone. Thank you. Have a
Okay.
good night.
All right, Christine, thank you so
Bye-bye, you
much.
too.
Thanks for everything.
Thank you, Christine.
All right,
Okay.
so that would be 6 to 7 then on the 18th?
Yes. Look at how much we accomplished in an hour tonight. So
Yeah.
we're just,
Yeah.
yeah, really close.
And then the 25th would be the second public hearing, and that would be 6 to 8, generally speaking, at this point,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm. And that would be.
sorry,
the
I just wanted to get on my
quote-unquote final.
calendar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just, final if there are any, tweaks or modifications that we've made. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
all right, and then we will set it before the town board for approval in March.
Get in our deadline.
Yeah, I have to tell you, this deadline is literally set in stone.
No, I know. I
Yeah,
was on
you're-
today. I was on today.
Yeah, they're not kidding.
It was interesting though, they said, did he not say, actually I was talking to Ivy, did he not say something that was inconsistent, that municipalities that had county police would still have to answer even if they didn't have local police? Didn't he say that, or did I misunderstand him?
Did
Because
you
it
hear
should
that,
be
Chief?
a municipality that has its own police force should be dealing with this, as opposed to a municipality that uses a county police force.
Yeah, I don't think municipalities that had a county police force had to do it.
Right, I thought he said today that he thought they did.
I think what he was trying to say was some municipalities with local police departments are piggybacking on the county recommendations and just making them their own.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he said to them that you can't do that. And I thought to myself, oh, that was a bad assumption to make.
Okay.
Because
maybe some-
they will withhold all of your state aid, not just PD state aid.
Right, everything, right.
And they will appoint a monitor to come in and oversee your department.
Right, let's
Okay,
get
I have a
this done.
question.
Yes,
When can we expect results from the survey that was distributed?
well, it's open for a month.
So how is that going to impact our ability to make adjustments to our recommendations then? So when does that come in? When does that month end? It went out what, last week? What date did it go out? I'm just trying to remember.
Actually, if you pull it up, it says it right on the face page of the survey.
It may be that the Chiefs Advisory Board ends up being the one who then looks at the results.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to
and-
have to be some
and
data
Takes
analysis of that
actions
as well.
from that.
Okay.
Yeah, in the report, you can just note that a survey was done to poll residents and interested parties, and it will be studied, and future recommendations will be gleaned from that.
Right,
Should that be a direction underneath the in these recommendations or no?
I think with the CAB, we probably should mention it, Chief. that
I'm
the
in the
survey
room,
was
folks.
taken.
I have to go get my son.
Yes, you do.
But I didn't eat sort of 7 o'clock sharp. Thank you. I apologize.
Okay, not a problem.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Jeremy.
Jeremy.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ivy will try to handle it.
So,
Difficulties of this time, this group.
We know how difficult it is for you, Ivy, but you're stuck, right?
To take over.
Yeah, Tiffany
All
and
right,
I
so
will
the
put this
CAB.
together. We'll include a little
Okay.
thing under the CAB, probably the survey. I think
Okay.
that the CAB should mention the survey. I think we should also mention the fact that we issued a survey that talked about gauge the community's general comfort level with the police and their interactions with the police or something.
I think Harvey was spot on, because I think that was our discussion, that while this initial survey wasn't done by professionally or doesn't professionally, it was definitely going to give us areas what we were going to focus on in the future.
Right.
Maybe
In the
have
fu-
more
yeah, ongoing.
on that. So I think that should be in the overall recommendation.
And I have to tell you that if there's somewhere that that I'll put in the recommendation, I really think the survey, it has to be professionally done.
Well, I included that in my survey language. So, you know, the recommendation that I put out there, that we would hire a professional to help create, design, elicit, and then
Analyze. Help.
analyze. So I did add that. I
Right.
tried to make the changes that we had talked about, but I definitely put that in.
Yeah, because I have to tell you, that's just, yeah.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, that's a whole area of specialty.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So Tiffany and I will get going on that tomorrow morning. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good
Have a
night.
good night.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.